you hold your post and you live out the gospel in your authority with no apologies, but with humility and godliness and in community. But it's too many leaders running around here who are neglecting their ability to actually lead with authority because they're scared of being counseled. You at the coffee shop all the time. Why don't you just go be a barista?
Welcome to the Grimké podcast. We are into it.
We are.
Doug Logan on my right, Brian Laughlin across the table.
Glad to be here, Joe.
Douglas Brent Ponder to my left.
Oh gosh.
Absolutely.
The name
Whole
came out.
government
Middle
name.
Wow.
No, Gaelic name, English name.
Somehow I knew the etymology was coming, to be honest.
Brent.
I love that.
Mine's is all Gaelic.
I have to look that one up.
Douglas and Logan. You
It'd
can't
be
get more
amazing
Gaelic.
if I had
Doug
one
Logan of the clan Logan.
one Scottish, one Irish, one English
on the
name.
rabbit trail that is Doug has like 4 or 5 official names already.
With the government, he said a different name in every state, which is very
One name
concerning
that he
to me.
has,
I know.
as an anecdote, is he didn't want to pay some extra money to get the right name, so he just settled for a name that they
That's right.
gave
So if you
him.
ever see his license,
Absolute magic.
not actually his full name.
$900 is expensive for
Yeah.
I worked at
we
a,
do letters.
a
We just
DMV
stick
got
with
you.
Doug, whether it's Doug, Douglas, we don't
I worked
know.
at a Christian bookstore where they were selling those little bookmarks that had it said the true meaning of your name. And
This
you
is
know,
why you're cynical, by the way.
well, it's one of a bajillion reasons. But what's funny about that is, of course, all the biblical names, it's easy to get those right.
Sure.
Just look up the Greek, the Hebrew, whatever.
Okay.
But the names that were not from the Bible, they just cold made stuff
Did
up.
they really?
So I
it's
immediately
fantastic.
look mine up.
Speaking of organizational leadership.
This is Douglas. And
That's
Douglas is
marketing.
Gaelic, and it meant dweller by the dark stream. But that didn't sound sufficiently Christian. So
no.
what did the bookmark say? Douglas means seeker of the light.
Seeker of the light.
Isn't that funny? It's like, I
That's the
guess,
literal
if,
opposite.
they're like, if you're dwelling by the dark stream, you must be seeking the light.
Yeah,
I was like,
get out of here.
It was amazing. I was like, well, that's special right there.
I remember that card too.
It was special.
Because it was little cards, all like
all the little inserts.
Well, as much as I would love to talk about names and etymology
Let's
today,
not.
that isn't what we're doing.
Most
Isn't
everybody's
what we're
turned the
talking
episode
about.
off
well,
by now.
for the record,
So-
you took us there.
I did. I mentioned his
point.
middle name.
He did.
It was my fault.
His middle name
It's
is Jet, by the way.
my fault. It is Jet. J-E-T-T.
Pretty amazing.
Somewhat related to Joan Jett and the Blackhawks.
Jet like from The Last Airbender?
Yes, but
Not
don't
like
chase that.
Jet with one T.
You know that.
That's amazing.
Not
Yes.
Jet with one T. Jet with two T's.
It's the least expected reference in the history of all
in
references.
Doug and I's defense, it's the first one that came to my mind. I just did not bring it up.
That's
No,
awesome.
I
I
love
do
that.
love that show. As far as kids' animated cartoons are concerned.
Definitely, this might not end, Joe.
I know.
Where are we going? here?
Your head is similar to his.
Yeah, and it's true. I could go as him for Halloween, but I have to shave the beard, so I'm not going to do it. But the big blue arrow, I got a runway ready to go.
See, I'm going to provide some direction and organization
Thank
to
you.
this
You're not going to
conversation.
light up anytime soon.
Because organization is important, especially
Even
when
though you're
things
seeking the light.
start to get off track like the conversation is right now. So
Okay.
we need to bring some organization.
I think the Lord did this to us. He gave us the least organized intro ever for one in which we're going to be talking about organization.
Organization.
Oh, there's a segue.
I like it.
that.
You like that?
That's nice.
See, bringing in the organization. Organizational leadership. So we would say, is it the most important thing in leading a church? Absolutely not. Secondary, I would say, to more important things. However,
Yes.
the secondary thing, if
Depending
you
on
do,
where you're coming from,
It's true.
It's probably it needs to be way more up on your
Yes.
list,
Yes.
or it needs to be dethroned.
because if you botch organizational leadership,
Right.
you can tank your church, get fired, make people miserable.
Yes.
Even if you're focusing on prayer, study the word, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, I've heard
So-
you talk on this before, but Jonathan Edwards was fired for essentially what amounts to a kind of organizational leadership mistake.
Yes.
His poor handling of a particular
book
case.
scandal.
His wasn't an issue with his doctrine. It wasn't an issue with the church believing something different. He just royally botched the adjudication of a sensitive case and did it in such a way that everybody who loved him turned on him, and that man was out.
Right. I'm sure no pastor listening has ever experienced anything like that.
right.
But Jonathan Edwards did, and you might. And so today we're talking about organizational leadership.
Well, what are the categories you always use, Joe, which are wonderful to help set everything up, because those do differentiate some of these problems we're talking about.
Right. When people hear that, they tend to think, we're about to get all John Maxwell, Lencioni, Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And they're like, that's not Christian.
I
And
have
so-
the Bible and the Harvard Business Review right next to one another on the shelf.
Exactly. And a lot of that really is awful stuff. But
I know pastors like that, by the way.
yeah, absolutely. We've all known them.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
Well, not the Bible.
I won't name names, but there was a large seminary in the U.S. that in the early 80s
Okay.
essentially did that.
Yeah.
where they
Was it
shifted.
Harvard?
No,
Come on,
no,
that's
no.
funny.
It was a conservative and Southern Baptist seminary, but they shifted their school's journal toward explicitly owning just endless business practices. And if you've ever met one of the men who graduated from that school, late 70s, early 80s, you can see it, hear it, smell it in their
And
ministry.
he said, "Give me a call," and then they handed out his
Give me
business
a call.
card.
He had the Rolodex, the old Rolodex of all the things.
Amazing.
So typically we separate pastoral leadership from organizational leadership.
Yes.
Pastoral leadership is when you go to the Word of God, all the things that a pastor should do are very, very clearly written. Praying for the people of God, giving yourself to the ministry of the Word, preaching, visiting people in the hospital, visiting prisoners. All that we would say would be pastoral ministry. Doesn't change no matter where you are, what you're doing. It is the qualifications for an elder. We might think
Character qualifications.
Character
fall into that.
qualifications, exactly. If you're not doing those things, you may open your Bible one day, pink slip, you're fired. Like elders have to do these things.
Correct.
So, Reform Pastor by Richard Baxter would be a great book on pastoral leadership.
Just a quick.
I remember this. I don't know. I'm sorry to interject. You remember this story? We were in the room. We were writing some curriculum for church planting organization, and I remember we got laughed out the room because we suggested they actually read Baxter.
Right.
But the guy who laughed us out the room was the guy who needed to hear this podcast because the only category he had for leadership was organizational leadership. Anything that dealt with pastoral qualifications in terms of character and actually specified roles according to the scriptures, that didn't matter.
Right.
Because essentially you were a organizational religious leader.
Sure.
And those are the books that actually mattered.
Right,
Exactly.
and I hate that. It is a funny story. We could share the long form of that sometime. But the frustration for me when I hear people like that man you're referring to, and others, lots of people make this mistake, and they refer to these kind of organizational leadership principles as something extra that's added on to pastoral ministry. But I don't think that's how the Bible talks about it.
No.
When I look at 1 Timothy 3, where Paul gives one of the most extensive lists of pastoral qualifications, there's a word he uses twice in there. He talks about a man who must manage his household well, and then he asks in verse 5, if he cannot manage his household well, how could he care for the church of God?
Right.
So the Greek word that's translated manage there is proistemi, and that specific Greek word is used in other contexts where, although manage is already pretty strong. I mean, we're sounding like manager, right? Which is not identical to what we would want to say about pastoral leadership, but you're already within the realm of, okay, we're thinking about leadership here.
Yeah.
That same word is used in Romans 12:8 when Paul lists gifts of the Spirit. You don't see it in English because it doesn't say there, if you have the gift of managing. It says if you have the gift of leadership.
Right.
But it's the same Greek word. And then one more time, 1 Timothy 5:17, where he says the elders who do what well? To rule well.
Right.
Same word that's used there. So already baked into the cake, if you will, of Paul's thinking on what it takes to be a good pastor. He's using a word that's closely related to the idea of managing affairs, being a leader, organizing and putting things in order and doing it in such a way that those who are entrusted to your care actually thrive.
That's great, Doug.
Absolutely. And if we look at the Reformational confessional history, if we go to Westminster Confession, chapter 1.6, chapter 1 is all about the Bible, and section 6 is about the sufficiency of Scripture.
Okay.
And so you have them describing that the Scriptures are sufficient. What's interesting is the second half says, and that there are some circumstances concerning the worship of God and government of the church, common to human actions and societies, which are to be ordered by the light of nature and Christian prudence, according to the general rules of the word, which are always to be observed.
Right.
So even our best scholars and divines and theologians recognize the Bible is sufficient, but there are going to be some things you need to learn through general revelation that are going to inform your ministry and in the rule of the church.
Yeah, not to oversimplify it in layman's terms, but the way God has built the world, it's baked into the cake of order and leadership and how to move people towards a common end and organize them in an effective way that is helpful and enriching to everyone and also accomplishes the purpose that they're set out to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the word, I mean, Dr. Ponder did well to lay out from an exegetical perspective. The word leadership is never this. When you read, I have a degree in organizational leadership, and when you read the word leadership in these leadership books, it's always ambiguous. It never has a direction. It's just some spooky dooky concept of leadership, but the Bible is clear. It's on the management and movement of God's purposes and plans for his people. It's always attached to an actual purpose, always attached to a job description. It's not ambiguous leadership, but it's actual.
Yes, great, Prez, because some books maybe are trying to kind of bring these terms, these concepts together. So maybe you hear language like spiritual leadership. Essentially, you have pastoral qualifications and organizational qualifications. Those wed together. You have to see them as necessarily linked in order to manage and lead the church well, but they're distinct in what they require. So in terms of being qualified for pastoral leadership, as you said, there's specifics on those in terms of character and role fulfillment.
Right.
Organization, you have a lot of flexibility in according to prudential matters or wisdom that is fitting for the times, seasons of the church and what it is facing, and therefore wise leadership flows into those, which we combine to call something like spiritual leadership.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's what the divines were getting at,
Right.
in those areas. But we've got the whole Bible, number one, number two, and what a gift Proverbs is. It helps us supplement the gap that we may lack from a level of silence, not a level of silence in areas, particularly I think about ecclesiology, things like that. It's clear, male leaders only, but how does ordination happen? Do we read this? Do you get a certificate? Of course, I'm just being ridiculous, but those things. But then we've got this beautiful book of Proverbs that marries the reality of wisdom tied to God's beautiful mind, heart, and love for his people that we can then begin to utilize to see a direction that moves towards God's heart, not towards just ambiguous ideas that we can limitlessly call it liberty.
And going beyond the Bible for a second, which, by the way, I just want to point out, Westminster Confession says there are some things that must be ordered according to the light of nature and Christian prudence. And so I want to reemphasize that because that raises a particular question that we don't have time to fully chase down today, but it's worth highlighting because I know this is a question that some of our listeners would have. It's because one of the challenges in the modern world today is most of the men, not all, but most of the men who tend to write about leadership are not believers. That wasn't always the case. I was just reading Althusius's Politica a few weeks ago.
That makes sense.
It's a masterful work. You've read it. It's masterful. The man has tons of ideas on how to organize communities, cities, whole societies. Amazing. Super solid, post-reformer. There was a time when Christians led the way on this stuff. That day is unfortunately not the day we live in, which raises the question of, well, how and when and where and why should Christians seek to do what Augustine calls plunder the Egyptians, right? And borrow from non-Christian sources under the guise of, as Westminster says, using the light of nature and Christian prudence or wisdom to figure these things out. Because a lot of guys are going to say, I don't know about that. It seems like we shouldn't be using secular wisdom to, think about how we run the church. That would kind of be the way they would frame the objection.
Yeah, that would be a genetic fallacy as far as dismissal. When we're talking about the light of nature or Christian wisdom, I think too many guys that don't think well on these things misunderstand. Well, you don't go to the Proverbs to get your model.
Right.
You don't. You go there to actually get your principles of how the truths of God's word are expressed, principally speaking, in terms of their broad application in life. And those lead to specific practices that accord with what it looks like to be God's people. Your models, if you will, are in service of those things. Guys that don't differentiate well typically don't put the pieces together very well. They end up compartmentalized or they're divorced. So a lot of what they refer to as secular leadership books typically are ungrounded books in terms of their principles or their moral vision that underlies why they're organizing in a particular fashion. That actually what underlies it is something that betrays biblical fidelity and therefore leads the church astray in a lot of ways. So you need to put these pieces together well. Last thing I'll say about this kind of intro stuff is it relates to kind of the trellis and vine concept. A lot of folks over the years have read that book many years ago. I've heard it, but essentially the organism is what is primary, building the people up and leading them to actually grow in a healthy fashion. The structure or the trellis is always in service of facilitating that growth. in its proper season, and the model needs to accord with the timing that the organism or the vine actually is in its overall life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's fantastic. I mean, John Calvin, if he's one of your heroes, he's a great exemplar of this. People forget that the first book that he wrote in his early 20s was a commentary on Seneca's letter to Nero, which would have been a leadership book. So in that age, so commentary. Calvin's literally first thing he wrote was a commentary on a leadership book.
It's great.
He says
by a pagan author.
By a pagan author,
and
right.
the number of reformers who wrote commentaries on Aristotle's work would absolutely shock people today if they were aware of that.
Right.
But anyway, back to Calvin.
Yeah. So and then in Titus 1, he's commenting on Paul's use of Epimenides, 600 BC philosopher. And he says this, from this passage, we may infer that those persons are superstitious who do not venture to borrow anything from heathen authors. All truth is from God. And consequently, if wicked men have said anything that is true and just, we ought not to reject it, for it has come from God. Besides, all things are of God, and therefore, why should it not be lawful to dedicate to his glory everything that can properly be employed for such a purpose?
That's right, yeah.
That's what we're after.
Well, a lot of guys need to hear that,
right?
Because they're really focused on being Israelites. Mm-hmm. Too many guys go to plunder the Egyptians without understanding what it means to be a true Jew.
Right.
So we need to don't go plunder too fast without actually being grounded.
Exactly.
But if you don't go plunder, you're not realizing what you're actually plundering is the wisdom and the things that folks have observed from God's world. It's actually his truth, and that's what he's pointing out.
Absolutely. Hey, this is Joe Holland. Whether you are a longtime listener or this is the first time you're tuning in to Grimké Podcast, would love to invite you to give generously to the work here at Grimké College and Seminary. We are training pastors and church planners to go out all over the U.S. and the world to proclaim Christ, build up churches, and to reach the lost. We would count it a privilege if you would join with us. If you'd like to give towards the work here at Grimké, you can text Grimké, Grimke, to 50155. Thanks so much. So I thought we'd go through the top 12 organizational leadership themes for pastors.
Right. It'd probably be 12 hours then.
I know. I do a good bit of work with pastors and Christian leaders. Actually went through and ranked the list on things I talk about most. So these are also in priority order in terms of
how you should put it together. Yeah.
I know. So it's number one is delegation. And I always say that pastors tend to delegate like Michael Scott declares bankruptcy.
Okay.
If you're familiar with that Office episode.
No, please remind me.
He has zero money, and they say, well, you can just declare bankruptcy. And so then he just goes around yelling, bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And bankruptcy.
That's so great, yes.
And so a lot of pastors will like, well, I need to delegate. And they just go around saying, delegate.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is if you delegate poorly, the promises of delegation, you will save yourself time. But poor delegation will actually take more time than it would take you to do it yourself.
That's right.
And so most pastors here, I need to delegate. They delegate poorly. It takes more time and oversight than if they do it themselves, and then they just fall back into doing it themselves.
Right. And delegation is biblical. Everybody
Exodus 18
probably knows Exodus 18.
Right. Unpack it though. Assume they don't.
Moses, it was God's chosen leader for Israel.
I didn't know you were going to start that far back, but that's a great point.
And his role had many facets that were unique to him, and yet, as the people of Israel is now on the other side of the Exodus,
600,000 of them.
Yes,
loads of people, and they were standing in lines longer than Social Security office on food stamp day.
Michael Jackson conference.
It seems impossible to be honest.
Taylor Swift conference. Whatever thing you want to say.
Line you hate.
And he's exhausted. His 18-hour days of hearing one case after another to impart wisdom and God's law applying to circumstances. And he's exhausted. And his father-in-law, Jethro, sees him and basically tells him he's a fool.
What you're doing is not good.
What you are doing is not good. Right? The Message translation probably said.
Well, that was after you got.
Pity a fool.
That's after you waited in line for two days, and he finally got there and said, "What you're doing? I know. I have wisdom for you."
He did. He waited his turn. His card was number 108,375. Right? What you're doing is not good.
That's right.
And
text message
then he
notification
told him
went
what to
off.
do.
Right.
And he tells him how to structure the community in such a way that he's delegating some of this responsibility, some of this authority to different people under him in tiers, tribes, and clans, and so on, so that people have a way of having the needs that they have met by somebody at a more local level. This is actually developed later into Christian thought, the principle of solidarity, and the idea that normally the person who can help most is the one who knows you best, the one who's closest to you, and it only gets kicked up the chain of command with particularly difficult cases that require extra wisdom, extra experience, extra learning, extra authority, and so on and so forth. So we already see that very early, second book of the Bible, a whole chapter dedicated to this need.
Yep. I've seen a lot of guys, they don't get delegation well, so they tend to do one of two things. They either they isolate and don't delegate. So therefore, the overall mission of the church, the purposes, what they're setting out to achieve, it gets bottlenecked.
Right.
Choked because they, for whatever motivational reason, they don't delegate well.
Yep.
They hold everything and think it's their responsibility to accomplish all the work, affect all the work, do all the work. Therefore, they end up being the hindrance to why God's people can't actually grow and affect the mission God's called them to.
Right.
The other side, and I've seen this a lot as well, is instead of delegating, they abdicate. So that actually leads to fragmentation in the church because guys say, delegate. That's right. I just gave it over.
Right.
And there's no integration.
Right.
There's no empowering others to accomplish a part of the work so that the whole work is actually integrated and accomplishes the overall set purposes.
Absolutely.
So you have fragmentation, if you will, when you confuse delegation for abdication. You're just giving over work without specifying how it fits to the whole, and it isn't organized well towards a common purpose.
Exactly.
So both of those pastors greatly struggle with.
Absolutely.
And that abdication is important because Dr. Plunder brought out that, Jethro was teaching delegation, not abdication.
Right.
Moses was still out and around, and I think abdication is one of the greatest organizational failures in the church because of often the motivation and the heart behind it. Isolation is equally as bad, but when I think about abdication, it's lazy, it's blame shift. So if you destroy it, I can blame you. It's often a leader trying to avoid responsibility for what's been handed to him and put himself in an ability to blame and complain when things don't work, which often shows their cards on maybe they shouldn't be pastors anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah, delegation, this too, maybe tongue-in-cheek way to put it, but delegation is giving over to others what they can do to do what only you can do.
Yes.
And that's at its proper time.
Right.
So there's a lot of folks that can do a lot of things, but you need to have a full responsibility,
Exactly.
a properly full plate. As that plate gets full, then you're delegating responsibilities to others and empowering them towards accomplishing the task that you can do as well, so that you can do the things that only you can actually do.
Right.
And so that builds up the whole church, but it also is the right timing of delegation, but it's also fitting.
Right.
So that actually builds up the whole.
There's a famous Eisenhower matrix. Right?
There is.
I know you know about that.
Yeah.
I don't love the language
Don't let
of...
them steal your thunder, Joe. Is that where you're going to go?
No, he's
we're
got something
good.
else. I don't love the language of important, not important, and urgent and not urgent, but I see what it's reaching for. We might could improve it by saying that there are some tasks that perhaps only you could do, or that you would do best. And if it is urgent, then you need to do it and do it right now. And there may be other tasks that only you could do or you could do best, but it's not urgent, so you just schedule that for another time. But there are other tasks that someone else could do sufficiently well, maybe even better than you in some cases.
Surely.
And yet it needs to be done relatively quickly. So those are the ones you delegate, right? The things that don't have to be you that do them, but somebody needs to do them.
Right.
And then there's lots of things that present themselves that anybody could do them, but there's questions of whether it even actually needs to be done. And you just delete that stuff. You don't even worry about that. And I think that can help a guy begin to think through which things should I be delegating, which things should I do myself, which things should I do, but I need to schedule them for later, and which things should I literally not worry about and not make busy work for somebody else for them to have to do it, because nobody needs to be worrying about that.
Exactly.
This also helps fortify and exemplify the type of pastoral character that you want to model for others. If you isolate, then you seem wrongly authoritarian.
Yeah.
And therefore it's you rule by your acts only, that you control everything.
Absolutely.
The abdication, you actually look as someone who's failing to take responsibility for the things that they should be taking responsibility, and so you're absentee, you're lazy, you're slothful, your typical objections that come towards pastors who do nothing but work their 1 hour every Sunday.
Right.
Because they actually don't have a full plate and they're not properly delegating. They're really just abdicating.
Exactly.
All in the name of organization.
Right.
I'm organizing well, so I'm going home and everybody else is going to do the work.
Exactly.
That's not the way
And
it
I mean,
works.
Acts 6 is a great example of what you all are describing. You've got a situation where Greek grandmothers and Jewish grandmothers are getting sideways with each other over a dinner table, which...
Right.
If you know anything about the stereotypes that
Greek
accompany
grandmothers
that,
and
My
Jewish
Big Fat Greek
grandmothers,
Wedding and any street corner in New York,
Fighting
that is
over a meal.
hilarious.
Right.
Fighting over a meal.
Right.
It is it's
That's
comedy.
a problem.
Act
I
6
know.
is comedy.
It is completely. And the pastors are like, our job is to give ourselves to the ministry of the word and prayer.
Sure.
We're having to navigate a conflict between Jewish grandmas and Greek grandmas. We need to impose some delegation, organizational leadership.
Right.
And so they call several men, which I do think is the proto-diaconate, to help mediate between these grandmothers, make sure everybody gets fed. There are no food fights, everything's fine, so that the elders and apostles can give themselves to what they primarily need to do.
Yeah, we don't have time to chase that. What they primarily need to do.
Right.
Word and prayer is not preach a sermon and pray.
Right.
So we don't have time to unpack that. But
Exactly.
when it's too narrow like that, then you actually have the objection of you're just abdicating your responsibilities.
Exactly. So just to be helpful, these are 4 things I always say that a pastor must do when he delegates. If they're missing, you're going to run into problems. First thing, he needs to provide a clear scope for what he wants accomplished. So if you're delegating to someone, you need to say what exactly you want them to do, what the end product should look like, and when it is due.
Right.
So if there is a potluck in the church, we need a potluck. It's going to happen on April 4th. We're going to feed 100 people. It's going to be from noon to 2, not... Hey, there's this potluck thing that's out there that's going to happen sometime. Some people are going to show up. Would you manage it? That's not effective delegation. So clear scope. Number 2.
So the redneck get her done.
Get her done, right.
Get her done needs more specificity.
No, get her done.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yep. I mean, get her done, but according to the scope
Exactly.
as specified.
Exactly. And I mean, but most people in your church, they want to serve. And so if you're like, hey, I need this help with this thing, kind of, sort of in the future, they're like, great, pastor, I'll help.
Sure.
And then they get super frustrated.
That's right.
Because they don't actually know what you wanted or when it's due.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
Second, what resources are available to them? Hey, you can go recruit 2 people. We've got a $200 budget for this. You've got the church email, whatever resources they have to accomplish the task. That way they're not wondering. Third, feedback loop, which is super important. When do you want to hear about the project you've delegated? Hey, if you have a problem, let me know. Hey, I want weekly updates. Let me know when it's done.
This is that integration point because this is proper reporting.
Exactly.
So you're not able to coordinate the work amongst many people if there's no reporting.
Exactly.
Everybody ends up working siloed. You've delegated, but actually
you have no idea what's going on.
You have no idea what's going on, and
Right.
then those who get who are delegated work, they tend to get frustrated because they say, "Well, I was just doing my job." Right, but nobody else knew about whether you were doing your job, so we couldn't do our job.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have to actually report.
Right. Exactly.
There's an old adage, I think it's from the military, about how you can delegate authority, but you cannot delegate ultimate, final responsibility. Sure. So if I were a captain and I had a number of sergeants in my command, in my company, and my superior officer, major or lieutenant colonel, comes to me and says, I want these barracks cleaned, by 0900 tomorrow. And I look at my sergeants and say, you heard the man. Get this thing clean right by that time tomorrow. If they fail to do it, it's not their butts that are on the line when he comes around.
The only thing that's in my mind is we had a long
Top
journey.
Gun.
We had a long journey with incompetency in an airport recently.
We did.
And that old Top Gun scene came where we were about to walk in there and talk about how we want some butts. Like
I want some butts.
You know, that old scene was so class. So
It's a great
somebody
scene.
needed to take responsibility.
So that guy got chewed out, remember? And he was a
Yes.
colonel or whatever. Viper was his code name, right?
Yep.
As a sign. And but then he goes and chews out the men who did it.
his name.
You know? Yeah.
Exactly.
That's how it works. So
It is.
So that all that was saying was is that you can't, if you don't have the kinds of things you're talking about, then the guy's going to misunderstand that the abdication thing you're referring to, that he's going to delegate it and say, well, I told him to do it.
Right.
I know, but you're the shepherd. It still comes
Yes.
back. If it doesn't get done, there's a lot of this that still comes back on you.
Right.
Yep.
And
And
number 3.
number 4, that was number 3,
That was
feedback
feedback
loop.
loop.
Number 4, which you just mentioned, it's important to communicate to somebody what happens if you don't do it.
Yeah.
Which communicates importance. So I had a nursery coordinator in the church I planted. We would just say, hey, if you can't find people to work in the nursery, we're not having a nursery that Sunday.
That's right.
Which is not like, hey, I'm going to not do my sermon prep and I'm going to try and find some, this is on you. If it doesn't happen, this is the result of that, which you would think would be maybe severe to people, but really it communicates what you're doing is important.
Clarity.
Like if you don't do it, there's going to be significant consequences.
And there unintentionally, if you fly in and save everybody, it ends in creating character deficiencies and lack of health in the church because it's a form of enablement.
Right.
Yeah. It also produces a culture of sentimentality because ultimately, does everybody feel okay after this? I know we didn't get any workers. I know there wasn't any water for all the volunteers, but I mean, we came and we made it work, guys. And wasn't that wonderful? And then when you step into the sentimental environment like that and go, can I just be honest? The Lord did show up, and He always does. Praise the Lord for that. But we failed.
Right.
Okay, we utterly failed.
This was poorly run.
This was poorly run. This was not accomplished. Our duties. And then when you do that over time, when you finally lay down the law, everybody goes, "You're just a mean person. You're just mean. You're just overbearing and rough."
The voices of magic.
church about grace.
And we've all been there.
Right.
But it's to your point, though, because you didn't specify what are actually the consequences if we do not accomplish what we statedly said we will do.
Right.
Then it actually is just good clarity in leadership.
Right. It is. And if there is a failure, you can deal with that. But at least you're communicating on the front end. This is important. Mm-hmm. There are consequences if you don't do it. And it usually people rise to the occasion rather than being crushed for that kind of thing.
Oh, that's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's delegation, number 1. Number 2, you can call it whatever you want. Time management, schedule management, time batching, what pastors do with their time. And the first thing I always say is pastors have an incredibly flexible schedule if they want it. It doesn't mean they're being lazy. It just means they have a lot of choices on when they work. If you want to work 8 to 5 in front of a computer like a CPA would, you can do that. You don't have to as a pastor. You've got a lot of options. So the first thing I try and communicate is look at your schedule, look at the demands of ministry, which often don't fit into 8 to 5, and figure out what you can do with stewarding your time that serves your family, serve your people, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, because your schedule according to the vocation. One of the illustrations you always use, and maybe you unpack it better than I do, is in terms of emergency workers.
Right.
How does that go?
I would say pastors are spiritual first responders. And when I'm talking to pastors, I say people in your congregation will not understand your schedule. Or what it means to be a pastor, or what your work. You can describe it to them, and they just don't get it.
No.
But if you can say, I'm like a spiritual first responder, so like a policeman or an EMT or a firefighter, their schedules are really weird too. There are times of low output because when they're called upon, it is a moment that high output needs to happen, and that high output can be planned. It can be a sermon or a meeting. It could be unplanned, like crisis counseling or going to the hospital.
Right.
And so when we view pastors like spiritual first responders, they're like, they have times that looks like it's not really deep, important work, but that's because when pastors are needed, they have to be on.
Yeah, that's good.
The example I always use is from Eugene Peterson's Contemplative Pastor. I don't like a lot of what Eugene Peterson writes. Some of it's very good.
It's very good.
He uses the example of a whaling ship. And so in the olden days, they were going out to kill a whale, big ship, spot the whale. Think like Moby Dick. Everybody gets into a small boat to
Skiff.
Thank you. Small skiff to row out to where the whale is.
By the way, I'll sign up for none of this, but go ahead.
Yeah.
That's correct.
You've got 12 guys rowing like crazy.
We're in Acts 27 this week, so all these nautical terms,
it's up there.
They're up here, dude. I'm ready. I'm ready
to go.
Soon
You
may
can
the
incorporate
weatherman
this on
come.
Sunday.
Bring us sugar and tea and rum. I'm ready, dude.
Yeah, that's not an Acts 27. Keep going.
No, we ended up in
I'm from Acts 27.
ended up in a shanty all of a sudden.
Don't
You
encourage
just
that.
never
John.
know.
Don't encourage
You
that.
never know.
Don't encourage the
You never know.
No.
The shanties.
Okay.
So 12 guys are rowing like crazy. One guy's doing nothing.
Yes.
And in fact, if that one guy tries to row, everybody's going to say, hey, listen, stop it. And that's because when they get out to the whale, that one guy is the spear thrower. He's got to throw accurate and precise, and he's only got a small window of time. And so there are different types of work. Some types of work are you produce as many widgets as possible during working hours.
Yeah.
That is not pastoral ministry. Pastors have unique moments where they have to be on.
Yeah, that's right.
You can't work all day and have a bunch of diligent, really hard stuff, and then all of a sudden walk into a crisis counseling and be at 100%.
That's right.
You can't stay up super late on Saturday night and expect you can walk right into the sermon and preach really well.
And here's what we all know. We should all know. Speaking of listeners, not the men in this room, this doesn't mean that downtime equals sloth.
No.
We're not saying, make sure you build in 3 hours of TV time, video game time every day, so that you're really on when the time comes. We're talking about that you shouldn't be fully engaged at a level that would take away from your ability to do something else. So there may be longer stretches of reading, of prayer, and walking, things like this.
Boring admin work.
Correct.
Right.
That actually enhance your ability to do the more difficult things that only a pastor can do.
Yeah, another analogy would be like shift work.
It is.
If you work 3/12s, that the next day might look a little different.
That's exactly right.
And that's not because you're failing to accomplish your day job. It's just the vocation requires a different schedule. The other thing to mention about schedules is everybody has one.
Yep.
So the guy sitting here and saying, I just feel like that's too over-engineered. That's treating people like objects, not like people, because pastoral ministry doesn't work that way. All that tells me is that you have a really poor schedule and you're not serving your people very well.
Right.
So everybody has a schedule. You need to schedule well to prioritize the work. That's the other thing that also gets overlooked in this whole discussion is time is a neutral thing. It doesn't mean anything. It just means the moment that we've been given to accomplish a certain thing, whether that be resting or working according to God's plan. But your time needs to be for effective work management.
Right.
You can't say you've been a faithful pastor because you're in the office every day from 9 to 5.
That's exactly right.
You did nothing
Right.
to make disciples, to care for the sheep, to further evangelize lost people, to build up the church. So the time that you're managing is actually the work management that requires a schedule.
Right. And back to the original, you have a ton of flexibility as a pastor.
That's right.
So there are plenty of people in office jobs where you've got to be there from 8 to 5, literally in front of a computer. That is not the pastor, which is good because your work demands are different than
That's right.
someone who
That's right.
has to be in front of a computer for all that time. So
That's right.
Encourage pastors to think through stewarding their time
Yeah.
for the work that God has called them to, which is unique work.
That's right.
So
Good.
Yeah. Number three, developing leaders and future elders. We've talked about this in a previous podcast, but it's super important. You can't get leaders on Amazon.
That's right.
And it's best to grow them up in your own church.
Yeah.
And that needs to be a major job of any leader, much less a pastor.
I don't know if it's helpful. One comment that comes to my mind on this point is too much bifurcation between just regular old discipleship and maturation towards being a Christian holistically and leadership. When you introduce leadership into the discussion too soon, then people tend to, it takes on this mystical concept that is wholly other.
Right.
What you're actually talking about is being a grown Christian man or woman, taking responsibility for the things that God calls us to take responsibility to increase in degree for the greater benefit of more people.
Faithful in little, faithful in much.
That's
Right.
correct. And then that results in faithful leaders.
Right.
And so you need to have processes that accord with that. But it's really the fruit of making disciples rightly understood.
Exactly. And I should say, I hate the word leadership. And it's actually a newer word. I'm sure that Doug is looking it up on the N-gram right
Hebrews
now.
7, I'm
He
looking
just
it
said
up.
it was in Romans 12.
I know.
But I don't know
about
how
the 19th
how did we
century.
get here.
But in the olden day, there weren't leaders. If you were leading something, you were called by your name. So there were statesmen.
Yep.
There were military generals. there were master craft. They were all leaders, but they didn't have this like general catch-all concept that describes everyone. So it is what it is today when we use that.
Well, no, it's to the point. If everybody's a leader, then nobody's a leader because nobody's following, and therefore, then the term just becomes nonsensical. It has to be wed to a particular vocational role responsibility.
Exactly. And as Barbara Kellerman, she's a leadership guru at it's either Princeton or Yale. She wrote a book, End of Leadership.
Okay.
And her whole premise was we actually focus too much on training leaders, and we need to train followers because, as we all know, a team of all leaders is a miserable place to be. You need people who are gifted in leading and people who are gifted in following, and that's not a bad thing.
So, no, that's great.
Yeah. But the way I describe to people is if guys are thinking practically, how do I train up people to lead different areas of the church? Say, okay, how does someone get converted in your church? And then how does that man one day become an elder?
Right.
Like what happens in between? New members class, he's in a Bible study, he's in a community group. We have this kind of like advanced training. Then there's going to be an elder track. Yeah. If you can build in between convert to elder, then all the things in between have on-ramps and off-ramps for everybody else in your church.
It's great.
Wherever they are, whatever they're gifted to do. So I always encourage guys just that question. How can a guy go from new convert to elder, however long that takes, what programs, what training, what discipleship you're going to do? If you can do that, the rest of it is just filled in.
Yeah, we're not talking about a mature man equals an elder. Just means we're talking about maturing disciples, mature men and women, and therefore there are certain, of course, culminative roles like an eldership that requires you to be mature.
Exactly.
And so that, as an end goal, sets a good stage of whether you're comprehensively thinking about how to make disciples, which results in good leaders.
Exactly. And very few people are going to end up on the elder side. Sure. And they might come in as a mature Christian, but there's going to be an on-ramp into somewhere in that process. Yeah. And there's going to be off-ramps. People are going to get trained and then go be a community group leader or go be a women's group leader, and they're not going to end up being an elder. But if you can do the whole thing, you've got on-ramps and off-ramps, then you do have a robust way of training up leaders in your church.
That's right, yeah. I would say don't overly spiritualize it too.
Oh yeah,
there's intentionality too. This is why it requires a process of an encouragement towards growth, and growth looks like a tangible thing.
Right.
So don't just sit around. I hear a lot of pastors always doing this. We're just praying for more leaders. You should be praying for more leaders, and you should be doing something to make more leaders.
Right.
Make more leaders. Stop sitting around and act like they fall out of the heavens, or they just have a spiritual Pauline moment in your church, and all of a sudden they're ready the next day.
There was a popular book in the 90s called Disciples Are Made, Not Born.
That's right.
You could do that with leaders, right? Yeah. Even if you hate the term.
Sure.
Which, by the way, ago in Greek, I lead. Heieme in Greek, to lead or to be a leader. It's the word that's used in Hebrews 13, 7 and 17, which says, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. And it does show up in English as early as mid-1500s. So not quite as new, but I take your point that it's strange how popular it is now.
If you engrammed it, you would see.
I already did.
Oh, yeah.
Totally true.
Of course he did. But
it is to the underlying thing that we're talking about biblical leadership,
right?
That accords with God's kingdom and within His church. So we're delineating what we mean. We're not talking about quote unquote not non-Christian secularized versions that take on many mutated forms.
Right.
But we talked about abdication of leader in an earlier point, and then we talked about the isolation of the leader. Often in this space, this is just a pure neglect. Yeah, this is a neglect space. And there's just no plan in place. I remember, because Joe, you saw my church plan proposal back in 2009. In my last page of my church plan proposal on
that glossy with the comb on it that you put it from Kinko's back in the day.
It was there. And
that's all we had back in the day.
We had
it was marvelous. I wish I still had mine.
I had the stick figure, and I had the building of the church, and I had the church building, and then I had my stick figure, and he was like this outside the church. And then I had to put together a plan of, I think the language I used was full orbed.
How to get the stick figure inside the church?
How to get him from unbeliever to church leader and potentially church elder and church planner.
Absolutely.
But that was required of our, even I got assessed even in the PCA for church planning. They asked that of us. How do we move that And then how do we make new leaders? Now, I don't know if they held us to it, but they did ask us.
Right.
And so that's very important that a church planter, a pastor, has in plan to do it. And remember, leadership development doesn't appear in the text either. Discipleship and then more discipleship and then more discipleship does.
Right.
And from that crop of general people, general Christians that are being discipled and developed, pops up out of that. God shows and evidences in them leadership that then we take on and go deeper because he shows us the maturity, he shows us the consistency. But in the making of disciples is leadership development.
Right. So
I mean,
Thomas,
you would have passed any church plan assessment that I had, because any man who's breaking it down to such a level for folks to grow as stick figures and how they progress, this man's got it together.
Ready to go.
Because he's helping folks where they're at grow all the way through.
it's true.
Listen, Chad, forgive him.
But I mean, Thomas Aquinas makes your point.
I didn't even have drawings. It was terrible.
In the beginning of De Regno, which is his on kingship, Thomas Aquinas says, when God pulls together a group of people, he gives them different gifts for the service of that community.
That's right.
Some of them are gifted for rule. Some of them are gifted to be blacksmiths. Some of them are gifted to be farmers. And so when you look at the people that God's pulled together in your church, he has intended some of them to serve the church in roles that we would call leadership, whether it's an elder or a Titus 2 woman. So you look out over your group of people, and it's not that you're kind of manufacturing itself. You're looking at a group of people and saying, who is God gifted to serve this body? How can I develop, disciple, train, apprentice, mentor that person to serve this group? This group. So there's not a plug and play. You just choose 5 people and you hope it works. You're looking out over it, recognizing the way that God gifts people for service in the church.
Absolutely.
What do we got for 4?
For 4, we've got character development comes before skill acquisition. So one of the big things, of course, is that we think we can train anyone to do anything. And that's true maybe if you're changing the oil on your car. But when it comes to leading groups of people, character is more important than skill. Skill is very important. But having someone of high character, Christian maturity, we think of Titus 1, 1 Timothy 3, and the requisite requirements for an elder, not being, you have to be able to do this skill and these steps, but they're character development. So it's always an encouragement to pastors, making sure you're looking for people for high character. If it's ruling, if it's setting out chairs on Sunday, maybe they just need to be able to do that fast.
Yeah, and this is very important, but it's not very difficult to see why it matters. A high skill, low character man is a major danger.
Absolutely.
To a lot of people, himself and everyone around him. Whereas a high character, low skill man can be taught those skills that you're talking about, and he has the character, the requisite character to know how and when and where and why to use these new skills he's acquired.
Yeah, character, you might say, is the form that the skills the shape that the skills will take as they're exercised.
Yes.
So whatever moral basis, character traits that you're embodying and are holding, as you exercise those skills, they will accord with whatever character is underlying. So if that character is deficient or unchristlike or immoral or thin or weak or cowardice or unwise or sentimental, then as you exercise skills in the body, then it'll proliferate those character traits through the skills that you're exercising.
Exactly.
And so folks have to be aware of the essential nature of how character precedes whatever skill set you have.
Absolutely. Like I noticed in the PCA, when they were looking at lay elders, there was a disproportionate amount of lay elders who were either doctors, lawyers, or business owners. And I just thought to myself, none of those 3 professions mean that you're going to be of high character.
Sure.
This must be a skill assessment and the kind of cultural clout you have in that office rather than really looking for character.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when we look at that, how we select for leadership, and that we often diminish.
Well, the other thing I would say, too, along those lines is character is not enough. And God is also the one who gifts the level of skill increase. So if you have a lot of maybe well-intended folks that are trying to train leaders, and you just pick the guy who's the high character godliness guy, but he's just incompetent to affect the work.
Right.
And you're endlessly frustrated because you naively think just because he's like Christ in a lot of ways, he can actually accomplish certain things. and those things necessarily don't follow.
That's true. I mean, the scriptures speak to this as well. 1 Timothy 3:2 speaks about a man being able, his ability, able to teach. There are some men who will be remarkably godly in their character over the course of their life.
Yeah.
They will be humble and joyful and possess the fruit of the Spirit to a degree that convicts you. But
And to your point too, we also know a lot of those men also know the scriptures very well, know doctrine very well, but they're not able,
or at least they believe these things in as much as they understand them.
Right.
But they're not able to teach them to others and or Titus 1:9, rebuke those who contradict it, which requires understanding the error, where it deviates, diagnosing the particular problem, knowing which truths must counteract it. And that is an
would
ability.
differentiate between a learner and a teacher. So you can be a very advanced learner with a high capacity to consume and process information, but not be actually able to teach others to do the same.
That's right. So we're not saying skills don't matter. Of course they do. The skills are in the pastoral qualifications. But what we are saying is that character matters more.
Right.
And of course it does, because when you get this wrong, and many people get this wrong, right? They look at a very smart young man in the church, and what do they tell him? You are going to make a great pastor one day. To which I say, maybe. He could be a horrible one.
Right.
Like, many smart men are cruel.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
Right.
Just because you're a genius doesn't mean you're going to be a great pastor. On the other hand, we don't want to make the opposite error. It's just to say every sweet, humble, godly, kind, and hardworking person is obviously going to be able to learn the skills necessary to do pastoral work, lead others, and so on. That's just not true. Yeah. That's not how the providence of God has worked. To go back to De Regno.
Exactly. And don't crush young men just because they're godly and love the Lord, and then prophesy over them that they're going to be pastors when the manifest requisite skill set has also not been tested. Do not crush young men with that.
And so is that why you're mean to me, Doug? Because you're smart?
No, so that's called affirming the consequent, right? If a man,
I don't even know if that's
I didn't
logical,
say
to be honest.
All smart men are cruel, or that all cruel men are smart.
We got more points. We got more points.
Number five.
We're there, just like that.
I know. Be competent at communication to individuals and the congregation, and a part of that is making sure you handle conflict well.
Okay.
So I know pastors think, like, I'm a good communicator. I preach every Sunday.
Yeah.
But when they think of how they're leading the congregation, how they communicate about maybe lower level things or important things, we're buying a new building, or an assistant pastor left, or we hired an assistant pastor, or we canceled a program that everybody liked. Like they struggle to communicate those kinds of decisions in a way a congregation can understand.
That's good, yeah.
I think it speaks to insourcing and outsourcing, and those are words I'm just throwing out there. Insourcing, so many of these speak into that. I was talking to Dwayne Bond, and he started talking about the need for care and elders really shepherding the flock, and not automatically sending somebody with an issue to a counselor right off the top without a conversation, without the elder shepherding, back to abdicating again. And so we have to insource. We have to do the hard work as leaders to shepherd the flock of God that is amongst us. We learn, and we just can't hear a problem and then say, let me give you this 800 number and get them out. So we have to do the insourcing, and sometimes we're going to have to do the outsourcing. I mean, we're all generalists. Some of us are specialists as well. But when we need a super specialist, sure. But that's not every case.
Right. Yeah. To your point, you have to be competent for the work. Right. I forgot what leadership conversation I was in recently, and they essentially this book that this guy had read it was boiling it down to leadership is good leadership. Competency in leadership is conflict management.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, you're dealing with whatever the impasse is, the situation is, the hardship, the difficulty, the thing that needs to be solved amongst people, and you're competent to help them assess the situation well and move forward together for a common purpose.
Exactly.
That's leadership towards the right ends. So even though it puts it in the negative tone, it's conflict management. Essentially, that's what it is. You're leading them, and as you reach challenges, you need to be competent to meet those challenges and actually move forward.
Right, and churches should expect it, and not really be afraid of it. Like in every secular organization, there is a low to medium level of organizational conflict at any given time. It's just that when you bring people together, when you bring sinners together, there are going to be disagreements. People are going to handle them well and poorly. So that is going to happen in the congregation. So it's not like, oh no, but we've lost the doctrine of grace and love. It's just people are together and they're fussing and fighting. That's right. And they can pray and repent, and you need to be able to handle it well.
But that utopian pastoral idea is absolutely ridiculous. Right. Somebody told them everything was going to be perfect. That's a lie from the pit. Right. And that's where most of this comes up. Like, I can't. So Doug Logan, where they awfulize everything. Yeah. Oh, right. Well, they got into an argument. Oh, I need a sabbatical. Right. You need to handle your business.
Well, competency always accords with the expression of the vocation. Yes. So if you're a computer coder, you need to understand coding in order to be competent to actually meet those challenges. Right. Pastors are in the human business. Right. So this is to the point. You're dealing with humans.
Right. Yes. Right.
Okay. And humans do a lot of different things. If you can't help them actually grow in Christ's likeness in their humanity that's being restored, pastoral ministry and leadership in the church is not for you.
And my advice always is to make the call or have the meeting. And so what I found is that most pastors are conflict averse. And so when there's a conversation they know they need to have that may produce conflict, they start to think themselves out of it. Like, I don't know, like I'll wait a week and things are busy and maybe it'll just get better. It won't. No. And so what I found was I would do that. I'd find myself running through these mental ruts and pathways of trying to not have the phone call, make the phone call or have the meeting. When I found myself doing that, my rule was I had to make the call immediately. Right. I literally had to pick up the phone and call them whenever I found myself doing that. And so just encourage pastors, address things early, disagreements, miscommunication. It's much easier to deal with potential conflict early when it's small than later on when it's huge.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're the opposite of conflict averse, you're in pastoral ministry because you're conflict.
Right. You're pugnacious.
Yeah, you're pugnacious. You love conflict. Then that's the character deficiency we're talking about.
That is.
That's right. Put it in a proper light too. Is we always say, so I'm saying conflict. If you're always expecting conflict, you're going to have a negative attitude. If you think that actually growth comes through strain, stress, effort, which therefore is conflicted or has some difficulty to it, then your orientation is towards moving forward. It's not constantly a passive orientation waiting for things to happen, and therefore you come in as the cleanup man. Right. Yeah. You don't have as much to clean up when you're actually telling everybody, make sure you pick up your trash. Yeah. You've already let them know. So therefore, the guy who happens to be the guy who's a litterer, and you're mixed, he's the exception because you've put up the signs proactively. We don't litter here.
Why'd you look at me like that?
No, everybody has different propensities.
Will you say the following sentence? The rural litterer looked in the mirror.
No, I'm not doing that. I don't even know what you just said.
Yeah, you do.
I'm incompetent linguistically.
Peter Piper over here. Peter Piper.
Peter Peppers.
I know. Number next one, 6, halfway through. Next ones go faster. You must exercise authority. I've found pastors neglect the fact that they have been given pastoral and organizational authority to lead the group of people to God's glory, and instead they become pollsters or consensus builders. So I would encourage pastors, you need to exercise in a godly, kind, loving, grace-filled way the authority that God has given you. And a lot of pastors shy away from that.
Yeah. So real quick on that point, because this is a place where we can take true doctrines and then misapply them in false and harmful ways. And one of the ones that people do this with all the time, not just in this area, but definitely in this area, is the priesthood of all believers.
Yes,
the priesthood of all believers means you have direct access to God through Jesus Christ.
Correct.
It does not mean that every believer
is
equally gifted in the same way by the Lord, equally capable of doing all things in the same manner. It does not mean that. And so
has equal levels of spiritual authority
or
in the
authority,
church.
Maturity, because authority often comes to those who take responsibility, who possess maturity, and so on and so forth. And so if a pastor's like, well, I'm just one man, and I'm like, who am I? Right, bro.
I'm always trying to figure out who's the bad stereotype behind some of those
mix it up.
Don't chase it up. Yeah, that one's pretty good.
In this case, that guy, I would say, brother, if you don't feel a sense of urgency and the weight that comes with the authority.
Right.
Knowing you will incur a stricter judgment. These kinds of things.
Exactly.
You don't succeed in this by saying, I don't actually possess any authority. That no good leader ever does that.
Right.
None of them do.
Right.
Yeah, well, we've said this many times, but just a couple points about this is one is we live in an anti-authoritarian age.
We do.
We hate the concept of authority. When we actually understand what authority is, it's a good thing. I think somewhere back in the etymologies, it comes from the root word to grow. I think it's all gere. So the whole point is it's to help us grow in accordance with what is good. Everyone wants to grow, and God gives us true and good things for us to pursue. And therefore, we have agency, and we also have responsibility to lead others, given our certain roles, towards what is good. And everyone ought to be exercising authority to help everybody do that, given whatever your role is. Right. So we shouldn't be shying away from authority. Authority has been placed over us in every area of life as God has seen fit. For the actual health of the organization. Without authority, it's anarchy.
We're not talking about lording things over people. Like we know Jesus warns against that, right? Where you're going around saying, I'm the boss.
Right.
You have to listen to me, but you don't possess the character, right? The convictions.
And then after that, he just formed a committee and said, what do you disciples
I'm going there next.
That's not what he did, by the way.
Warn against that, but also the other was such an obvious thing, he doesn't even mention it.
Right.
We don't just go around and say, well, but people do this. Right. They say, well, the husband is the head of the family, but he's a servant leader, which means he leads by serving. And I'm like, well, now, yes and no. Also, he serves by leading.
Correct.
Can we get that? Right, yeah. Can we get that down too? Because that means if he's been marked out by the providence of God and set apart by a people to be the leader who leads the way, then one of the ways he serves that community is by being the thing he's been called to be. So a leader does not lead by serving only. He also serves that community by leading in a unique capacity that's different from everybody else.
And he exercised his lordship through service towards different ends than the pagans that were lording for the wrong ends. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's too much asymmetry or discontinuity when folks read that passage and think, therefore, Jesus said that everyone who's a leader needs to actually be a slave and a doormat for everybody else telling them what to do. Right. That is not what the Lord, who had all authority, turned around and did.
Right. And he did become the servant of all. We are to be the servant of all. But the way that you serve is not by not being a leader. Right. It's by being a leader who serves on their behalf. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying?
But a lot of the weak, compromised leadership, first thing, it trickles all the way back to the house.
Oh, yeah.
So your wife is probably your pastor at the house, and you're not leading well because you're a coward. Mm-hmm. Number two, and then when you bring that back to the church, and you're a coward, scared to take responsibility, all flowing in and from, that's just the bad one. Now here's the good one that goes bad. I just read a couple articles, and this guy got fired for abuse. This guy was too authoritative. He was exercising authority in a bad way. The Bible doesn't change because Sister so-and-so didn't like you telling her no. Right. You still have to stand on the Bible. The calling is to not be an overlord, not be a Gentile lord, but to walk out biblical leadership with humility and godliness and do your job and take these bullets. Right. And the Bible doesn't change because the culture has shifted, and now we're scared to say no at the threat of cancel culture or ending up in some article. Nah, you stand still, you hold your post, and you live out the gospel in your authority with no apologies, but with humility and godliness and in community. So when I go crazy and I think I'm not crazy, I got a bunch of people telling me I am crazy and I need to repent. But it's too many leaders running around here who have stopped and who are neglecting their ability to actually lead with authority because they're scared of being canceled. Well, you at the coffee shop all the time. Why don't you just go be a barista?
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean the answer for bad authority is good authority.
Exactly. Not no authority.
It just kind of boils down.
Or 51% majority.
That's right. Yeah.
If your people could vote themselves in a right direction, they wouldn't need a leader. They would just have a vote.
That's exactly
that's right. Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's not how God's organized His church.
Love it. We rant. Forgive me.
Love it. Number next one.
The most boring of all of them, but important. Number 7, know your church constitution and bylaws.
All right. I know you've got a lot of great stuff to say on this, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. But before you do, let me just say this. right? Law and order are a package deal. They go together for a reason. There's a reason that those two terms.
It's a great show. And
right.
had multiple
It's an
seasons.
excellent
This
show.
one.
Never
Ding,
seen
ding.
it.
Yeah.
Never seen it. But law and order as a concept, right, go together because
I'm
one
leaving if
one
you're
is an
not.
end. The end is order, and law is a means to that end. It is a means, not the means, which means philosophically what we would say is that law is necessary, but not sufficient to produce order. And this is important because what we're not saying is, yes, real order is achieved through lawlessness, anarchy, chaos, lack of structure, no constitution, no beliefs, no systems, no process. Nobody's saying that. We're not saying that. But what we need to hear before we hear about the good kinds of constitutions, bylaws, and so on that we talk about is that laws by themselves are necessary, but they are not sufficient to produce the order that God commends in the scriptures. And what that means is that when we open the New Testament, it does have things to say at the level of principles and other things like this about how we should structure and order a church. But we cannot miss that in the pages of the scriptures, God gives more priority to having the right kind of man than he does to having the right kind of bylaws or even the right kind of polity. I know that rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
That's right.
But Calvin says that too in his commentary on 1 Corinthians 11, verse 2. Go and read what he said there. It sounds like the least reformed thing Calvin ever wrote. But I think he was right. And I think that we need to give due consideration to the fact that if you had all the right bylaws and the right constitutions and the right doctrinal statements and all the rest, but you have the wrong kind of man in leadership, it's going to fall apart. Laws, as you always say, don't enforce themselves.
No, I mean, I think you have guys typically in church leadership also swing. The pendulum kind of swings. So they want to do what's right, but they don't order the work, and therefore they can't accomplish what's right.
Sure.
And then that falls apart, and therefore they swing the other way, and they say, hey, we got all the order in place to accomplish the work, but the work that they're pursuing is wrong, and therefore they're not doing it the right way, and they can't accomplish the right end. So order or the structure that you have or the bylaws that you have are always in service of the overall goal. We were talking recently on a panel, and a pastor was asking, they had an entrenched kind of a fight in their church amongst committees and counselors and consultants and various advisors on how to refine the bylaws exactly right because they'd had some division in the church at some levels, and they thought the bylaws were going to fix it. But the reality is, you cannot fix a heart problem with a law answer.
Right.
You just cannot. Those are in service to a rightly ordered heart. This is what we see in terms of the fruit of the Spirit and otherwise. So you have to put the bylaws that are a good thing, a structure, in service of the overall heart of the church, based on the right things that is led by grace, not by law.
Right. And just, anecdotally, I've heard this 100 times. If a conflict in a church lasts long enough without being dealt with, like we talked about in the communication and conflict point, what eventually happens is that people will ask for the church bylaws because they want to use that to try and resolve their conflict. And so whenever someone asks for or a leader wants to use goes to the bylaws, something very wrong has happened about 6 to 8 months ago.
No, right.
You might figure it out now.
Yeah,
Something's
that's right.
very bad.
That's the appeal process.
Exactly.
That's right.
And they may do Matthew 18, and they may do biblical qualifications for bringing a charge against an elder, but they absolutely are going to the bylaws and figure out what happens. So pastors, just because they love their congregation, need to make sure their constitution and bylaws. Very simply, constitution says how your church is structured. Bylaws say how power is expressed in your church, how people get voted in. And then typically not a part of those two, there will be your church procedures and policies. So if you're thinking about right organization, you've got the constitution, you've got the bylaws, and then you've got your procedures and policies. If you're incorporated in your state, every state has different incorporation laws. Also get a good church attorney. They're going to hand you a template first, and you're going to say, that's a good starting point, but I need your help to figure out how we can craft this to represent who we are as a congregation and how we do business. And it's a protection. It isn't just a protection for you, for your congregation. If they're written poorly, a lot can go really wrong. And it isn't necessarily because the really wrong is really bad. It's because you had bad bylaws.
That's right. If they're written wisely, they're in service. So think when tragedies happen.
Right.
These bylaws are in place before that happens, that are agreed upon procedures for those tragedies that are not overcome by the emotion of the moment.
Exactly.
So when you have a pastor who commits adultery and is disqualified from ministry, but it was maybe not a full adultery, but kind of an adultery, but also somebody else, and he's been trying to repent because it wasn't as bad as we thought.
He went to third base, not fourth base.
Right, because so
Guys,
then I'm not sure that we should dismiss him over a thing. The bylaws have already stated up front, we understand clearly what it looks like in terms of dismissal of a pastor.
Right.
And therefore this qualifies. And I love that man, and my heart is overwhelmed and broken
Right.
for him. However, he is dismissed.
Right.
He's disqualified.
Right, which just helps.
Yep.
The whole thing.
It absolutely does, because the sentimentality at some of these cases is overbearing.
Yes.
It's overwhelming.
Yep.
Not overbearing, overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because people get emotional at the moment, and the bylaws can
They just
serve
help, right.
as a biblical reminder of your sobriety as a leader.
Right. They also lastly, they can protect you from frivolous lawsuits that might come from outside of the congregation.
Sure.
People suing you because they want to have a wedding in your church and, they're in sin. You say no. Well, and your bylaws are helpful. So it also protects you from external culture or frivolous lawsuits. So anyway,
It's good.
number 8, this is going to sound like the weirdest one.
This is great.
Yep.
Risk mitigation, which sounds very businessy, but pastors have a very bad habit of not planning for things in the future that may happen.
Right. If I can translate into biblical categories for guys so they can rest a little bit better, we say don't be a fool.
Don't be a fool. Right.
Okay.
That's real spiritual.
Yeah. Let's just say a risk mitigation
Right.
is guarding against being a fool.
Right. Exactly.
So you're assessing well what you're trying to accomplish and how you're going to get there.
Right.
Counting the cost, not being foolish, mitigating risk so the collateral damage doesn't impact the congregation in negative ways.
Exactly.
And so that's just wisdom.
So, and
It's wisdom.
when we talk about it, it's always positive and negative. Pastors usually only think about negative risk. So examples would be, if you're a church plant, you've got outside support. Also, you hopefully are raising up a congregation that's giving generously.
Yeah.
There's going to come a point where that outside support is going to dry up. There is a negative risk that when that support dries up, if your congregation isn't large enough or generous enough, you might have a budget shortfall.
Yeah.
So negative risk mitigation means I plan for that. I do the numbers. When's it going to run out? How do we do our budget? It's just basic planning. It's
good.
Positive risk mitigation is making sure you can take advantage of opportunities when they arise.
That's correct.
Sometimes opportunities come and you're just not in a place. So if you want to buy a building and you've got zero savings and a great building comes on the market, you are not in a place to take advantage of that opportunity because you didn't plan to have a down payment for that building. So pastors need to think both in terms of threats and opportunities. Like you said, don't be foolish, be wise, plan for the things that you can plan for.
Yep.
Yep.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, if you put them in maybe other categories along this discussion is terms of growth and loss.
Sure.
So you have certain risk mitigation in terms of loss of the congregation, meaning sheep wander,
Right.
They jump the fences, they leave the church for whatever reason. You need risk mitigation to actually make sure you're caring for them well and meeting those needs. Growth mitigation also in terms of risk this is lost opportunity for the mission.
Right.
So typically know your orientation as a pastor. A lot of pastors are very mission oriented, evangelistically oriented. They're constantly thinking about the next person who needs to come to know Christ and be a part of his fold. And then other pastors are saying, are we caring for people well? Are we making sure that we're mitigating any risk there? It needs to be both and, because both of those are areas of either loss and gain in the church life.
This is related to number 8. You must have tiered leadership in order to scale for growth. Is this every church? No. If you're a church under 120, you probably can have one pastor. You get to 200, you typically have 2 pastors. You break the 200 barrier. You've got to start scaling how your church is set up. If you have small groups and you have people who lead small groups, if you get to 600, you're going to have leaders of small groups.
Yep.
It is the only way to prepare for growth is to have tiers of leadership, and you have to scale for that and be prepared for that. So I always give the example, you don't want to succeed into failure. If you have a coffee shop, it's a small coffee shop, you're opening, you can maybe seat 60 people. You think, well, I'm going to do this great marketing campaign. I'm going to let everybody know we're here. We're going to do great. 400 people show up on day one.
Right.
You've succeeded, but you've succeeded into failure.
That's right.
Because you can only serve 60.
That's right.
So for churches, you need to care for people who are there, predict growth, how are you going to prepare for the people you hope the Lord brings to your congregation? This has to do with seats and parking lots and discipleship and counseling. But it's thinking through how are we, if the Lord brings growth, how are we going to provide for the people who come?
That's right. Yeah.
This is like the lines at the store during Christmas.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Another way to look at it is proper division of labor.
Exactly.
So you
very
have
similar
it-
to delegation.
That's right.
Right.
It's all of, if you look at all of the other 7 or 8 that we have preceding, scaling is the organizational expression of putting all those pieces together well and dividing or delegating the work properly to affect the comprehensive work in front of you.
Right.
So that's going to look, and a lot of pastors are deficient in thinking these terms.
Right.
So they without knowing it, they're unintendedly just banging their heads against a ceiling for years.
Right.
Because they can't break through. It's actually not. It's not a prayer issue. It's not a character issue. It's not a preaching issue. It's a scaling issue. You haven't organized the church well to actually meet the growing needs of the church or the care needs, so that actually everybody can move forward.
Exactly.
And so you just haven't organized well.
Exactly.
And I would add to that, the reason, Dr. Laughlin is a great leader in both spiritual and lack of a better term, physical plant. But so many pastors struggle in this area because they never had a job. They went Bible college, seminary, internship, and then they were thrown in.
That's right.
So they've just never managed people.
Right.
They've never seen stuff fall apart. And back to somewhat of a utopian idea of how ministry should go. People get saved, they get baptized. It's awesome. Well, no, if the Lord shows up, which he's been known to do, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men.
Right.
We have to be ready for that. And and so many of them just lack any experience by the time that growth happens to them.
It's greatly deficient, to your point, is if you haven't actually worked with someone in a vocational field around a common job that's organized with multiple employees or working with other workers, then you're really going to struggle in the church. So I was, as you mentioned, Perez, worked in construction for a long time. So if you're building a house, you have all types of delegated division of labor, folks that's tiered responsibility and actually power, authority, and who's in charge. And then you also have the various trades that you're putting together, organized towards a common task of building a house and in its proper time as you actually build it out. So proper project management and the rest of it. This is something as simple as building a house, by the way.
Right.
When it comes to the church, you are seeking to organize and manage the whole life of God's people.
Right.
You can't organize men to actually build a home and put together that common effort. You're really going to struggle in actually building up people to build lives.
Exactly.
So in terms of how authority is affected, how leadership is accomplished, how direction is needs to be carried out, you're really going to struggle. So to your point, a guy who's just has this utopic idea. I mean, this is why the shepherd-sheep metaphor, I think, is wonderful if you press into it. Every farming show that you watch, and those of you who might be farmers at this table, nobody comes back. There haven't been any studies done that I know of, and I'm not SME in this area, that has finally realized that sheep are brilliant. That they self-organize. You're not going to just have everybody there and go, hear ye, let's follow the Lord. And everybody knows where to go. That's mayhem. Organizing the sheep requires a lot of extensive clarity organizationally to help everybody thrive and be a healthy church. And so it's not a small thing.
It does. And it's just basic dad stuff. Like I remember when we had 2 sons, and then Hallie was pregnant with our 3rd son, and we had a little Toyota Corolla. And we're like, okay, third boy's coming. We need a minivan. We need to prepare for this next child and whatever children that the Lord's going to bring. So if you've got a Sedan church and you hope your church is spiritually pregnant, we're going to be seeing lost people saved and more people coming, then what does it look like for us to be a minivan church? We're going to have to prepare for growth in order to serve the church really well. So.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, and you remember the story, but the whatever you have for a season works great. You got to organize that towards other things. The Corolla is wonderful. I remember when we were both planting churches and And you need a
That gold
soundboard.
Corolla, I remember.
Pastor
Jammed
Joe
it in
shows
that
up
thing.
in his Corolla and this huge soundboard. We just jammed in the trunk across the things.
It's amazing.
And that was the Corolla was your family life vehicle.
Oh, yeah.
church growth vehicle.
Church growth vehicle.
It was a utility work
Yes,
van
sir.
for the church. That Corolla was amazing.
I had scratches from those speakers for
Yeah.
the rest of the time I owned that vehicle.
Yeah, it depreciated the value.
It did.
But ultimately,
In
you
an amazing
upgraded
way.
to a van.
I
It was
did.
magic.
I did because of babies.
Right.
So,
I love it.
number 10, we must have both faith and planning.
Yeah, this should be obvious, but for whatever
Should be
reason,
obvious.
it's not.
I like it
think
being last or close to the end of the list.
Pietism run amok. People think that you don't have faith if you are somehow taking action. I remember one time I was working on, we were building homes for desperately impoverished people, and the forecast was calling for rain. We look up at the skies. It looks like it's going to rain. So we pray against the rain so that we can continue the work. And then we begin to cover the roof because we'd taken all the shingles off and it would have been really bad.
correct, yeah.
And one of the men suggested that we didn't really have faith if we covered the roof. And I remember even as a teenager, I'm like 16 at the time, I thought, that is very dumb. That's
right.
That is extremely dumb.
Right.
He obviously had never read Nehemiah 4. Listen to what Nehemiah 4. This is right after Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites,
Yes.
right? They're all conspiring together to come against Jerusalem.
Yep.
And verse 9 says, we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night.
Yep.
We prayed and set a guard. And then down in verse 13, so in the lowest parts of the space, behind the wall, in the open places, I stationed the people by their clans, with swords, with spears, and with bows. I looked and arose and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and homes. Remember the Lord and fight.
Right.
Pray and set a guard. That's what real faith looks like in action.
Right.
You know, there's not a whiff of fatalism in the Bible.
No.
It's crazy.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Good.
And Acts 2 is just the New Testament of Nehemiah. Once the church got everything in common, when we get down around 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. Now all the believers were together and held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed the proceeds to all as any had need. When we see that, we spiritualize the all in common and the awe and the people getting saved. But we forget somebody had to organize all the money and all the donations. Some of those were probably livestock. Some of that was probably, I don't know, baskets of apples.
Right.
There would have been a host of different things that would have had to be managed, cared for, inventoried, and there was probably some pretty amazing people that organized that. It was done so good, it doesn't even mention they fell apart. It just keeps going. The verse just keeps moving past it.
Right.
And so sometimes pastors can miss that there was a lot of work done there was some awe and some QuickBooks.
Absolutely.
I read an organizational leadership translation of the Bible in James 2, and it said, "Faith without planning is dead." So it's at least
The John Maxwell version?
Yeah, the John Maxwell version.
I'm hitting on my boy John.
That's right.
I do not know the man.
Yeah. So anyway,
And if somebody wants to read more, actually, if you get Martin Luther's commentary on Psalm 101, he mentions, and we think he wrote it for Philip of the Elector of Saxony, who was a civil ruler. And the whole first part of his commentary on Psalm 101 actually talks about this principle of, yes, have good plans, but also God's going to do what He wants to do. It's
great.
So yeah, he has this running illustration. He says, you think 3 + 7 = 10. Well, God can turn 3 into 30 and melt 7 down to 1. And so he's just like, have your plan, like math, but also God's going to do what He wants to do.
Right.
And we hold both of those in tension.
That's good. It's great.
Number 11.
We're almost done. We're going to make it.
We're going to make
I can
it.
feel this.
Yes.
This was planned well.
Especially as we commentate along every introduction to every point. So
I know.
You just added to it by saying that.
Well, I know that was the irony.
As did I.
That was the irony.
That was the irony.
Let's go. Number 11.
Number 11, recognize both relationships in the church. There are relationships, and there are also clear metrics for different tasks and jobs that are assigned to both volunteers and maybe church staff.
Yes. Yeah.
Both of those. And so what we found is, of course, in the church, we want to have pastoral relationships with people, Christians who are brothers and sisters in Christ, maybe close friends, maybe family members, all the relationship stuff.
Yeah.
And then hopefully there are clear expectations for what it means to do your job,
Right.
so that the church runs well, which we've talked about the importance of all that. If these get mixed together, the conversation gets very difficult.
Yeah.
So if you've got a guy on the music team, he's constantly showing up late every week, and you have a conversation with him and say, requirement of being in this team, you need to show up on time because we can't get everything ready. He said, well, I mean, I thought I thought you were my pastor and this church was about grace. Like, whoa.
Right.
You're mixing them together.
Here we go.
Yes, you are my friend, love you, want to see you grow in responsibility. If you're going to serve on this team, here are clear metrics that need to happen so that we can all serve to God's glory well.
good.
That's right. Yeah, it's purposeful relationships.
Right.
So, I mean, not even the stereotypical generationally millennials grossly struggle with this.
Yes.
Because they want to be in community, which means they sit around and stare at one another.
Right.
Which, praise God for that. We need some buddies. However, we're buddies on a mission.
Right.
And so we need to actually always keep those in right relationality towards one another. We're not in relationships just for the sake of staring at one another or talking sentimentally to one another. All of that's great. We should stare at one another, should talk to one another. But it also with a purpose baked into the cake of growing, serving, accomplishing a common mission to serve the larger body, and therefore that looks like something.
Right.
So especially when maybe the metaphor for church as a family is helpful. I mean, I grew up in a family business, so you had to, as the business leader would say, wear multiple hats.
Right.
But at the same time, you're still the same person. It just the question is, what time is it? Mm-hmm. So I love you. Yes, we had a meal together last night, and we talked about dreams and hopes for life.
Right.
And right now, I'm your boss, and I need you to get that done.
That's
and
right.
we've already talked about this before, and therefore you should accomplish it.
Right.
I feel like we're not friends. We are friends. You could be a better friend by doing your job.
Right.
So we need to actually hold those together well. It just is kind of simple. But people that haven't navigated that well or integrated those things and keep them seperate actually struggle with that.
And
Paul referred to Epaphroditus as his brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier.
Good.
If he was speaking spiritual brotherhood, but even if he had been his literal brother, which he wasn't, but let's pretend he was, right? They were both brothers and soldiers. They're working, and he's failing in his duty as a soldier, and a man dies.
Right.
And then he rebukes him for his failure and the death of a man that now hangs over his head. If he said to him, I thought I was your brother. I
thought we're brothers.
We are brothers. You still stunk it up as a soldier today, right? That's just one facet of our relationship. It's not the only one. That's
right.
It may even be the most important one, but in that moment for that task, no, actually it wasn't.
And you guys have brothers. Do you have a brother?
I don't. Just
You guys have brothers, and your brothers have failed you. And you failed them.
Yeah, I probably failed them more than they failed me.
No, I'm not dogging them. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But even in the
after we listen to this, I probably failed you the most. Just lay that out there.
I don't have no brothers.
And I should say, pastors should be patient because there's an oddity in church relationships. For most people, they have their church family, they have their work relationships, they've got their hobby people that hang out, and they've got their family.
It's fragmented.
The more that you work in the church, the more all of those things come together.
That's right. That's correct.
It's church, it's my family, it's my friends. I'm also working here, and a lot of people they've never had to think. Which hat are you wearing? What am I doing? How do I navigate
there's so
that?
much other to it. I mean, that's because ultimately the church has been so, desecrated, fragmented, torn apart as a actual body, as a community, as a social entity, that we typically outsource most of our lives to things that don't integrate to the overall Christian life.
Right.
And so there's much more there. We'll have to chase another time, but.
Last one.
I do love how all this is cascading, Joe. So all of where you started, these are the expressions of how all these principles take form, especially at the end. They're underlined.
Practically. And the last one's kind of weird. I'll say why in a second, why this one is number 12.
It's not just because you're weird.
It's not just because I'm weird. It's not because I needed 12.
12 tribes.
12 tribes, 12 apostles.
That's right.
12 points. Mm-hmm. Be careful who you keep as advisors. Some of my academic work has been studying leadership books in the high to late medieval period. And what I noticed, even into the Reformation, is that some of the constant counsel was be careful who you admit to your court and who's your advisor if you're a leader. Because if you get a bad advisor, they can lead you astray. And they were especially concerned about flatterers.
Yes.
It's like all over. And I don't know any modern leadership book that's like, hey, watch out for flatterers.
No, absolutely. So a flatterer, right, is a yes
You're
man.
one of my favorite on this particular show.
Fantastic.
I think your wisdom that you brought.
Flatterer is a yes man. So a leader is a danger to himself when he only surrounds himself with men that he knows will say yes to every idea.
Right.
My favorite illustration of what this looks like is if you go back to episodes 4, 5, and 6, the first 3 Star Wars movies that were made in 77, 80, and 83.
Oh, yeah.
So the first one, 1977, George Lucas makes it, but guess what? He's a new director. It's a new project. It's a new field. Sci-fi stuff is kind of taking off, but the studio's not sure whether it's going to succeed. So they constantly told him, no, you can't do that. That's a dumb idea.
Right.
We're not. And then the producer says, we're not putting that scene in there. That scene is dumb as rocks. It's real bad. We're not doing it. And guess what? New Hope was amazing. Round 2 comes around. Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, widely regarded as one of the greatest sequels ever made because it improved on the original. It was fantastic. Not directed by George Lucas. But by the time the success of Star Wars runs away and they get to making in the 90s, episodes 1, 2, and 3, guess what happened? George Lucas was a hero in everybody's minds. So he surrounds himself with a new team of flatterers, of yes men and yes women, who every idea he had that came into his mind, they were like, that is a great idea, George.
And that's
We
how we
should
got
do
Jar
that."
Jar Binks.
And that's how you got Jar Jar Binks. They've actually made a documentary of this. It's called like The Beginning, the making of episode 1. And what you can actually watch, don't watch the whole thing. It's boring, but if you watch the last 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes of it, it's awesome. They're all sitting around, they're watching the finished product. And as soon as the movie stops, the camera pans and shows everybody's reaction. Extreme deflation, extreme underwhelm. Everybody's like, this thing stinks. And they knew it stunk, but the problem was it was all done. They couldn't fix it. You know how they got there? They didn't take the counsel of late high medieval leaders.
Wow.
They surrounded themselves with flatterers. It's the
Flatterers.
worst.
It's amazing.
Doug, that was so awesome. You
like
are
that?
so
It's
awesome.
Wonderful.
Oh, God.
The other thing, you definitely don't want yes men.
Yeah.
But you also don't want dunnos.
Exactly.
I don't know anything.
Right.
So you cannot surround yourself with
Indecisive,
incompetent men.
Right.
So too many guys have very sentimental, sweet guys that have high character and no capacity or ability to actually affect the work that you're talking about.
Right.
So you want collaboration at that level, not just with yes men that are going to flatter. Those who understand the work, hold to biblical truth, are realistic in how they actually assess whatever you're facing.
Exactly.
And are competent for the work. So too many guys don't pursue competency, and therefore they do things deficiently because everybody on the team's incompetent and they're not pursuing excellence. Exactly. So this is especially run amok in a lot of very good, very rich confessional Bible Reformed churches. Is they're holding the confession well, but they're not able to execute in any concrete ways, actually leading the church well organizationally, even in terms of basic things like hospitality. They very much struggle because they pursued competency only in a narrow area of theological
truth, intellect,
excellence, fidelity, those sorts of things, but not actually organizational competency, and therefore it has a detrimental effect.
Exactly. And that's probably something we can learn from the medieval period in that, because a lot of times when you became king, it wasn't because you had an MBA from Harvard or were really good at organization. It was because your dad died. Right. And so, your dad died, he was the king. Guess what? You're the king now. So what they would do, they would create courts, and they would look out and say, these are going to be my advisors, was the court, which had courtiers.
Right.
And they would make sure that those guys had different skill sets, had different backgrounds, because the king would come and say, I'm just here because, Pop's died. Should we go to war or not? And you have different advice, and you want it to be mixed advice, and you certainly don't want to flatter us and be like, oh yeah, it's going to go great. You really needed the truth, and you needed it from a host of people that could advise you in the task that you have. So pastors do great. Say, this is my church. This is where we are. This is the demographic that we're in. Like, what kinds of people should I have around me? Because I'm not the complete deal.
Yeah, I was talking to a young man who wanted to plant a church, and he was trying to assess all the situation. And this requires great humility and submission.
It does.
To the best ideas, to what is actually true and good. And if that doesn't always originate with you, it should originate amongst your advisors. And you humbly embrace that, even if your idea wasn't the best. He was shocked when we were talking. He said, "You mean it's just the best idea wins?" I said, "Of course it has to be that way.
Right.
If not, you want to be a fool, right? Right. Do you want to do the stupid idea?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right.
So it actually takes a lot of humility to actually submit to the best advice that you should be getting on the team.
That was all 12. Hopefully
there we go.
We've served men, and hopefully don't make some of the mistakes that we all made when we were coming along in some of these areas. So
yeah, we can do a whole episode on those things I've learned by mistakes.
Yes,
that'd be fun.
Yes, absolutely. So thanks, guys. See you again next time.